The air in the little frontier town carried the sharp tang of dust and horse sweat, thick with the restless shuffle of boots and the murmur of anticipation. Clara stood stiff on the wooden platform, her hands bound loosely before her, though she knew there was no need for rope. She was not the sort who would run, nor did she have anywhere left to go. The boards beneath her bare feet were hot from the noonday sun, and each creak beneath her weight seemed to echo the humiliation rising in her chest. Her step-uncle had made good on his threat. He'd taken her to town under the guise of buying supplies, then sold her name to the auctioneer as though she were little more than livestock. She had known he despised her. Ever since her parents died and she'd been left in his care, he had treated her less as kin and more as a burden, a strong back for chores, a body to keep the farm running while he drowned his coin in whiskey. But even knowing his cruelty, she had not imagined he would stand by while strangers placed their bids, reducing her life to the jingle of coins in a pouch. The crowd gathered thick before her. Rough-faced men with dusty hats leaned on hitching rails, their laughter low and coarse. Women stood at the edges, whispering behind gloved hands, some pitying, some gleeful at the spectacle. Clara had heard their words for years, too tall, too broad, too big for beauty. They had turned her strength into something to mock, her hands too large, her shoulders too wide, her presence too much. She held her chin high now, though her stomach twisted, refusing to let them see her break. If she wept here, it would be a gift to them, another piece of amusement for their afternoon. The auctioneer was a sharp-voiced man, his hat perched high, sweat streaking his cheeks as he bellowed above the crowd. "Here we have a fine, strappin' woman, strong as an ox, fit for work, fit for the fields, fit for whatever a man might need." He laughed at his own words, and the crowd roared with him. Clara's cheeks burned, but she did not lower her eyes. A voice jeered from below. "She'd eat more than she's worth," another chimed in. "Ain't no man wants a wife who could wrestle him down." Laughter broke like waves against the platform. Clara's hands tightened into fists. She wanted to shout, to tell them they knew nothing of her heart, nothing of the nights she had lain awake dreaming of gentleness, of belonging. But the words sat heavy in her throat. Instead, she pulled her shoulders back, willing herself into stillness. The bidding began, hesitant at first, for none truly wanted her, but a few saw use in her size. One man lifted his hand, his grin cruel. $10, she can chop wood for me." Another shouted, $12, I'll have her carry barrels." Their eyes slid over her like she was a mule to be harnessed, never meeting the pale green of her gaze. The sun beat down mercilessly. Each number called out seemed to hammer another nail in the coffin of her pride. Still, she would not bow her head. Not here, not in front of them. And then, amid the clamor, the crowd seemed to part, its noise dulling for just a breath. A figure stepped forward from the back, not rushed, not eager, but steady. Clara's eyes caught him before she could stop herself. He was tall, broad of shoulder, with the weathered skin of a man who worked beneath sun and wind. His hat shaded his eyes, but when he lifted his chin, she saw they were calm and steady, a gray blue that held no mockery. He did not lean with the others, nor did he shout crude jokes. He simply stood, boots planted firm, gaze fixed on her as though measuring something unseen. Clara's heart stuttered. No man had ever looked at her that way. Not like she was a beast, not like she was too much, but as though she were simply there, a person. The auctioneer's voice wavered when he noticed the newcomer. "We've got 12. Do I hear 13? Come now, she's a strong one, worth her keep. 15. The voice was deep, even, carrying across the crowd without strain. Heads turned, murmurs rippled. The rancher had spoken, and with no jest in his tone. The man who'd bid 12 spat into the dust. 16. 20. The rancher didn't so much as blink. Laughter erupted again, but it was uneasy this time, curious. "He's mad," someone muttered. "Payin'? Good coin for her?" The bidding rose, more for sport than intent. A man shouted 25 just to stir the pot. The rancher answered 30. Another called 35, laughing as though it were a game. The rancher, steady as a rock, said 40 without hesitation. Clara's breath caught. Why? Why would he? The auctioneer's gavel hovered, his voice high with disbelief. 40! Do I hear 45? 45? Last call now, gentlemen. Silence fell. No one wanted to chase further, not against a man who wasn't flinching. The gavel cracked against the block. Sold! To Samuel Hayes! The name rippled through the crowd. Some nodded with respect, others muttered. Samuel Hayes, rancher of the Far Valley, a man known for his work, his quiet, and his refusal to bend to foolishness. Clara stood frozen, her breath trapped in her chest. The ties around her wrists were cut. She stepped down, her knees unsteady, the world tilting as though she'd stepped into a dream. Samuel stood waiting. The crowd still lingered, eyes hungry for her shame. She could feel their stares like thorns in her skin. She braced herself for the cold hand of ownership, for the smirk, for the claim of possession. Instead, Samuel extended his hand, palm open, steady, and warm. Clara looked at it, her throat tight. Slowly, as if her body moved without her mind's permission, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, not crushing, not gripping to control, but firm, grounding. He leaned just enough that his words reached her ears alone, quiet as the hush before dawn. Don't listen to them. You're just right for my arms. Her heart broke and healed all in the same instant. For the first time since she could remember, the weight she carried did not feel like shame. It felt like belonging, waiting in the strength of his words. The crowd's laughter rose again, but it no longer pierced her. Samuel led her away, his hand steady on hers, and though the world still jeered, Clara felt something she had never known before, a flicker of hope, fragile but alive, burning steady beneath her ribs. The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled away from the town, dust rising in long, lazy swirls that clung to Clara's dress. She sat stiff on the wooden seat beside Samuel, her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white with the pressure she pressed into them. The laughter of the crowd still rang in her ears, and though the town shrank behind them with every turn of the wheels, the weight of it did not ease. She had been sold, her life decided by the call of a gavel. And yet, the man at her side sat calm, reins steady in his large hands, eyes fixed on the road ahead, as though none of it mattered. She stole a glance at him, careful not to let him see. His profile was strong, carved by years beneath the sun, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. His jaw was set, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet determination. He didn't look like a man gloating over a purchase, nor one seeking to shame her. He looked like someone carrying the weight of his own thoughts, steady, immovable. It unsettled her almost more than cruelty would have. Cruelty she understood. Kindness she did not trust. The silence stretched until it pressed heavy on her chest. She wanted to ask him why. Why he had done it. Why he had wasted good money on a woman no one wanted. But her pride clamped her mouth shut. Better to stay silent than to risk hearing pity. The road stretched out long, winding through open prairie where the grasses bent like waves beneath the wind. Far in the distance, mountains rose faint and blue against the horizon. The sun lowered, painting the land in gold, and Clara's eyes stung with its beauty. She had never left the small patch of farm her uncle kept her chained to, never seen the world spread wide like this. A part of her wanted to drink it in, but another part whispered she didn't deserve to. The horses slowed as Samuel guided them off the main road, following a worn track through a stand of cottonwoods. Beyond them, a valley opened, rolling hills dotted with cattle and fenced pasture. A modest ranch house stood at its heart, smoke rising from the chimney, and barns stretched wide at its side. The land breathed with life, not grand or showy, but steady, purposeful. "This is home," Samuel said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. Clara's throat tightened. Home, the word cut deep. She had not known a home since her parents died, only roofs that sheltered but never welcomed. She kept her eyes on her hands, unwilling to let him see the storm that raged in her. The wagon rattled to a stop before the house. Samuel set the brake, climbed down, and held out his hand to her. She hesitated. She could climb down on her own. She had always done things on her own. But something in his expectant gaze made her pause. Slowly she placed her hand in his, letting him steady her as she stepped down. His grip was warm, solid, not possessive. He released her the moment her feet touched the earth. He led her toward the house. The porch boards creaked beneath their steps, and when he opened the door, the scent of wood smoke and bread lingered in the air. The room inside was simple. A wide hearth, sturdy wooden chairs, a table worn smooth with use. It was not grand, but it was clean, and it felt lived in. "You'll have a room here," Samuel said, motioning toward a door down the hall. "It's yours to use as you see fit. Fresh sheets on the bed, wash basin by the window." Clara blinked. A room of her own? At her uncle's, she had slept in a loft above the animals, straw for a mattress. She had never been offered anything more. She nodded stiffly. Words caught in her throat. Samuel hung his hat on a peg by the door and turned to the hearth. "Supper's light tonight. Bread, stew, not much else. You must be hungry." Her stomach growled at the mention of food, but she straightened quickly, embarrassed. "I can cook," she offered, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll earn my keep." He looked at her then, and she felt the weight of his gaze. Not sharp, not mocking, just steady, as if he were seeing her rather than the idea of her. "You don't have to earn your place here," he said simply. "But if you want to cook, then cook." Her chest tightened again, and she turned quickly toward the table to hide it. No one had ever spoken to her that way, like her choices mattered. She busied herself with the stew pot, ladling thick broth into bowls. Her hands trembled only once, and she clenched them tight until the shaking passed. They ate in silence at first. The only sound, the crackle of the fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls. Clara's eyes wandered around the room, noting small things. The mended quilt folded neatly over a chair, the Bible on the shelf, the boots lined by the door. Signs of a life carefully tended, of a man who valued order and care. After a time, Samuel spoke. "You've worked hard before. I could see it in the way you carry yourself. That strength will serve you well here." She swallowed hard, her spoon pausing mid-air. Strength. The word had always been a curse thrown at her, a reminder she was too much for any man to want. Yet he spoke it as though it were something worthy. She forced the stew past the lump in her throat and said nothing. When the meal ended, Clara rose to clear the dishes. Samuel made no move to stop her, but neither did he order it of her. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, and for the first time in years, the gaze of a man did not feel like judgment. It felt like attention. Later, in the small room he had given her, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands pressed to her knees. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender, the window open to the cool night breeze. She stared at the basin of clean water, the folded blanket, the simple wooden cross on the wall. It was more than she had ever been offered, and it terrified her. She lay down, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the words he had spoken at the auction echoing in her mind. "Just right for my arms." The memory sent a strange heat through her chest, a warmth that scared her more than cruelty ever had. For cruelty, she knew how to bear. But kindness? Kindness could break her if it proved false. Sleep did not come easily. Yet when it did, she dreamed not of jeering crowds or the crack of the auctioneer's gavel, but of open skies and steady hands that did not let her fall. Morning came with sunlight spilling across her face. She rose, dressed in the simple clothes she owned, and stepped quietly into the main room. Samuel was already there, pulling on his boots. He glanced up, offering a nod. "Coffee's hot," he said. She poured a cup, the steam curling into her face, and sat at the table. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Samuel said, "Cattle need tending. Fences need mending. You up for work?" Her chin lifted slightly. "I've worked harder than most men." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, quick as a flicker of light. "I don't doubt it." That day she followed him out into the fields, the wide sky stretching endless above them. She carried tools, lifted posts, held her ground beside him as they hammered rails into place. Her muscles burned, sweat dampened her brow, but there was a rhythm to the work, a steadiness she found oddly comforting. He did not mock her strength. He welcomed it, relied on it, worked alongside it, as if it were natural. As the sun dipped low and they walked back toward the house, Samuel glanced at her. "You did well today." The simple words lodged deep in her heart. Praise, honest and unadorned. She did not know how to respond, so she only nodded, but inside, something fragile began to stir. That night, when she laughed at a small slip of his, when he tripped over a loose boot near the door and muttered under his breath, she startled herself with the sound. It was soft, uncertain, but real. Samuel looked at her. One brow lifted, and the corner of his mouth curved into a smile she had not seen before. For the first time, Clara felt the faintest glimmer that this place could be more than a roof over her head. It could be a beginning. The days passed in a rhythm Clara had never known before. Morning light spread across the valley, spilling gold over rolling pastures, and she woke to the low sounds of cattle calling, the steady scrape of Samuel's boots across the porch, and the scent of coffee drifting through the kitchen. She rose with the sun, not because she was ordered to, but because something in her stirred to meet the day. The ranch asked for strength, and strength she had in plenty. Yet the work here felt different. Her uncle's farm had been a place of drudgery where every task was demanded without thanks and every effort went unnoticed. Here, each swing of the hammer, each bucket carried, each fence rail set into place seemed to matter. Samuel never wasted words, but when he spoke, his praise was quiet, steady, and true. "You've a good hand with the horses," he said one morning as she brushed down a skittish mare. "They trust you quicker than they trust me." Clara glanced up, startled. Her hands moved automatically along the mare's flank, but her mind clutched at the words. Trust. No one had ever spoken of her that way. She mumbled something in reply, cheeks warm, and bent her head again, hiding the smile she could not quite keep back. The town, however, was less kind. Clara had to go there often with Samuel for supplies, and each trip was a trial she braced herself for. Whispers followed her down the boardwalk. Laughter drifted from groups of men who leaned against posts, hats tipped back, eyes raking over her as though she were some curiosity dragged into the light. Women clucked their tongues and tugged their children close, muttering about the shame of a woman sold on the block. Samuel ignored them all. His stride never faltered, his expression never shifted, but Clara could feel the tension in the air whenever they passed. She forced herself to keep her chin lifted, though the sting of it worked deeper with every visit. It was during one of those trips that she first saw him, the man whose shadow stretched far beyond the boundaries of the town, the land baron. His name was Crawford, and he carried himself with the ease of one who believed the world belonged to him. His coat was fine, dust-free despite the wind, and his mustache was trimmed sharp. He stood in front of the mercantile, flanked by two men who looked more like thugs than ranch hands, their eyes hard, their mouths twisted into smirks. Crawford's gaze fell on Clara the moment she stepped from the wagon. His lips curled, amusement flickering across his face as though he'd found a new toy to examine. "Well, well," he drawled, loud enough for the bystanders to hear. "If it ain't Hayes and his prize from the block, tell me, Samuel, how's it feel to marry a workhorse?" Laughter broke from the men behind him. Clara's face burned, the words slicing clean through the walls she had tried to build around her heart. Her hand tightened on the basket she carried, fingers white on the handle. She wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but here. Samuel stopped, his body still, his eyes locked on Crawford. The silence stretched taut, the town holding its breath. Then Samuel spoke, his voice calm even, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "Mind your tongue, Crawford. You've no right to speak of her." The weight of his words pressed into Clara like a shield. Crawford's smile thinned, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, Hayes. A man who throws coin after folly soon finds his land slipping away. You'll see. That valley of yours won't hold forever." Samuel said nothing more. He shifted the basket from Clara's hand to his own, then walked past Crawford as though he were nothing more than dust in the road. Clara followed, her heart hammering, her breath tight. When they reached the wagon, she climbed in quickly, turning her face away so he would not see the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The ride back to the ranch was silent, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of hooves. Clara stared at her hands, shame and fury warring inside her. The words still echoed: workhorse, folly, sold. She thought she had grown used to them, but spoken so openly, with Samuel beside her, they felt like knives driven deeper than ever before. When they reached the ranch, Samuel set the brake and turned to her. She refused to meet his gaze. He waited, patient, until finally she lifted her eyes, braced for pity. But what she found was steadiness, the same as always. "Don't carry his words," Samuel said quietly. "Crawford's got a small heart and a loud mouth. He sees worth in nothing but land and gold. That's why he'll never understand." Clara swallowed hard. Understand what? That a woman's strength isn't a curse, it's a gift. The words unraveled her. She turned away quickly, climbing down from the wagon before her tears could fall. In the weeks that followed, Crawford's shadow grew longer. Word reached them of offers he had made to neighbors, of land he had bought up with coin and threat alike. His men rode near the Hayes ranch often, their presence a warning unspoken. Clara felt the pressure mounting, like storm clouds building on the horizon. She knew enough of men like him to understand. He would not rest until he owned what Samuel had. At night, she lay awake listening to the wind batter the walls of her room, her mind restless. Samuel's kindness had begun to carve its way into her heart, unsettling and dangerous. She feared it as much as she craved it. She had never been allowed to believe she was worthy of such care, and yet here he was, day after day, treating her as though her presence was a choice, not a burden. She found herself watching him when he did not notice, when he bent to repair a harness, when he spoke softly to a calf, when he wiped sweat from his brow and stood against the horizon, his frame outlined in fire-colored light. She caught herself imagining what it might be to belong, truly belong, in his world. Then the fear would seize her, sharp and cold. Dreams like that were dangerous. Dreams like that were always torn away. One evening, as they sat by the hearth, the crackle of flames filling the silence, Samuel spoke. "You've been quiet these days." Clara stiffened, caught off guard. I don't know what you mean." "You carry words heavy," he said, his gaze steady on the fire. "I can see it. I won't pry. But know this, whatever was spoken in town, it doesn't change what I see." Her throat tightened, but she could not ask what he saw. The answer frightened her more than silence. She only nodded, staring at the flames until her vision blurred. The weeks marched on, and with them came signs of trouble. A fence line cut clean through in the night, a calf gone missing, strange boot prints near the barn. Samuel said little, but his jaw grew tight, and he began carrying his rifle slung across his back more often. Clara learned to read the lines of tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the horizon when he thought she wasn't looking. It was on a dusky evening, when the sky blazed with streaks of red and gold, that Crawford himself rode to the ranch. He came not with thugs but alone, his fine coat pressed, his hat tipped just so. Samuel met him in the yard, rifle resting easy in his hand. Clara stood on the porch, heart pounding, watching. Crawford smiled, all polished charm. "Hayes, you're a stubborn man, I'll give you that. But stubbornness won't keep your land when the drought comes. Sell to me now, and you'll walk away richer than you ever dreamed." Samuel said nothing. Crawford's eyes flicked to Clara. His smile widened, cruel and knowing. "And you can keep your prize, though I can't imagine what a man like you sees in her. She's nothing but a shadow at your side. Folks are laughing at you, Hayes. You'd do well to remember it." Clara's breath caught, shame burning hot. Her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, but Samuel's voice cut sharp across the space. "I'll tell you what I see. he said, his eyes locked on Crawford's. "I see a woman who works harder than any man I know. I see a woman whose strength saved this ranch before she ever set foot on it. And I see a future that doesn't include your poison on this land." The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Crawford's smile faltered, his eyes hardening. He tipped his hat, mock politeness thin as paper. "Have it your way, Hayes. But remember, storms don't pass just because you stand tall. Some storms will break you." He wheeled his horse and rode away, dust rising in his wake. Samuel watched until he vanished into the horizon, his face unreadable. Clara stood frozen, her chest tight, her heart a storm of fear and something far more dangerous, hope. That night, as the wind howled across the valley and the cattle lowed restless in the fields, Clara understood that life on this ranch was no longer simply about survival. It was about standing against shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. And for the first time, she felt the stirrings of courage not born of endurance, but of something deeper, of love unspoken, waiting in the silence between his words. The wind shifted restless through the valley, carrying with it the scent of rain and something darker, like the world was holding its breath. Clara felt it long before the sky broke. The cattle grew uneasy in the fields, their lowing deeper, more insistent. The horses tossed their heads at every creak of the barn door. Even the dogs paced along the porch, ears pinned back. Storms were common out here, but this one carried a weight that pressed heavy on the air, as though trouble itself rode the clouds. That evening, Clara worked in the barn, spreading fresh hay into the stalls while Samuel hauled sacks of feed. The lantern light flickered across his face, shadows cutting hard lines across his jaw. He had spoken little since Crawford's visit, but she could feel the tension in him, the way his eyes moved to the doors, the way he lingered when she walked from stall to stall. It was as if he expected something, and the not knowing gnawed at him. "You've been quiet," Clara said softly, her voice barely carrying above the rustle of hay. He straightened, dusting his hands against his trousers. For a moment he said nothing, then he looked at her, his eyes steady but tired. "There's a storm coming, Clara, not just in the sky. Crawford won't let go easy. Men like him never do." Her heart tightened. She had known it too, though she hadn't wanted to speak it. She stepped closer, the sweet smell of hay mingling with the scent of his sweat and leather. "Then we face it," she said firmly. "Whatever comes." He studied her, something flickering in his eyes that made her chest warm. He nodded once, simple and certain, and that was the end of it. The night fell heavy, clouds swallowing the moon. The first strike of lightning split the sky wide, thunder rolling across the hills like cannon fire. Rain followed, hard and fast, drumming against the roof until the barn rattled with the force of it. Clara closed the stall doors, calming the horses with her voice, but they stamped and snorted, restless against the storm. Then, through the roar of rain, came another sound, one that froze the blood in her veins. Shouts, hooves pounding. Men's voices carried by the wind, harsh and hurried. Samuel cursed under his breath, snatching his rifle from the wall. Clara's heart hammered as she moved toward the barn doors, but before she reached them, the glow of fire lit the night. The side of the barn blazed sudden and bright, flames licking hungrily at the dry boards. Smoke curled thick, the acrid stench filling her lungs. The horses screamed in terror, kicking at their stalls. "They've set it!" Samuel shouted, his voice sharp through the crackle of flames. "Get the stock out! Go!" Clara didn't hesitate. She threw open the nearest stall, gripping the halter of a panicked mare, and pulling with all her strength. The animal reared, hooves striking sparks against the floor, but Clara held firm, speaking low and fierce until the mare bolted into the rain. She moved to the next, and the next, smoke burning her eyes, heat searing her skin. Samuel fired a shot into the dark. A warning that rang loud, but the fire spread faster, climbing beams, leaping from wall to wall. Clara coughed hard, her lungs screaming, but she pressed on. A gelding thrashed, trapped by a beam that had fallen across his stall. Without thought, she heaved against it, muscles straining, the weight near crushing. For a moment, it did not budge, and fear clawed her throat. But then it shifted, rolled, and the gelding burst free, nearly knocking her from her feet. Samuel appeared through the smoke, his face blackened, his voice rough. "Clara, get out! Not without the last!" she shouted back, pointing to the corner stall. A colt, young and trembling, pressed against the far wall, eyes wide with terror. The roof groaned above, timbers snapping in the heat. Samuel started toward the colt, but Clara was faster. She slid into the stall, wrapped her arms around the frightened animal, and shoved with all her might until it stumbled forward, hooves slipping on wet hay. She dragged it into the rain just as part of the roof caved, flames crashing into the space where she had stood. Samuel's hand seized her arm, pulling her back as the barn roared behind them. They staggered into the open, rain soaking them, fire blazing high into the night. The heat licked their faces, but they stood together, chests heaving, watching the place they had worked side by side crumble into ash. Clara turned to him, her breath ragged. His eyes were on her, fierce and filled with something she had never seen before. Not just gratitude, not just relief, but raw, unshaken certainty. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could feel his heart pounding against her ribs. "You saved them," he whispered, his voice hoarse with smoke and something deeper. "You saved me." She shook her head against his chest, trembling. "I couldn't stand by." His grip tightened. "You're not too much, Clara. You're everything. Everything I need." The words broke through her, deeper than any wound had ever cut. She closed her eyes, letting the storm wash over them, her tears lost in the rain. For the first time, the strength she had been cursed for all her life became the very thing that gave them hope. The fire burned through the night, finally hissing into embers beneath the relentless rain. By morning, only blackened beams remained, smoke curling weakly into the gray dawn. Samuel stood with his arm around Clara's shoulders, silent as he surveyed the loss. It was heavy, yes, but not final. The cattle still grazed, the horses still breathed, and beside him stood a woman who had faced fire without flinching. The valley would whisper of it, she knew. The town would talk. But for once, she did not fear their words. She had seen the truth in Samuel's eyes, spoken plain in the midst of smoke and flame. She was not too big, not too much. She was his, and nothing Crawford could do would change that. The valley woke to smoke and ruin. The barn was nothing more than blackened bones clawing at the sky, and the air still carried the bitter tang of ash. Clara stood in the yard with her hands wrapped tight around a blanket draped over her shoulders, though the morning chill was nothing compared to the hollow ache pressing against her chest. Samuel moved through the wreckage, boots sinking into wet earth, his face set and silent. He had said little since dawn, only nodded when she tried to step in beside him. Neighbors began arriving as the sun climbed. Some came with buckets, others with words of pity, and still others with eyes sharp and curious, eager for gossip to carry back to town. Clara felt their stares as though they were knives cutting at her skin. She caught whispers about the fire, about Crawford, about her. Too big for a woman, that one. Reckless. She ran into the flames like she thought herself a man. She saved the horses, though, didn't she? Hayes would have lost more if not for her. The voices blurred together, a hum of judgment and reluctant admiration. Clara pulled the blanket tighter, her jaw clenched. She had faced fire without fear, but the murmur of people's voices still had the power to cut her down. Samuel lifted a beam with the help of two neighbors, tossing it aside with a grunt. His shirt clung to him, damp with sweat, streaked with soot, but his movements never faltered. When the others slowed, he carried on. Clara moved to help, her hands reaching for another beam, but one of the men blocked her. "Best let the men handle this, miss," he said with a smirk. "Wouldn't want you straining yourself." Her blood surged hot. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, Samuel's voice cut through, sharp and steady. "If not for her strength, you'd be burying horses today instead of helping me clear a barn. Step aside." The man blinked, startled, then muttered something under his breath as he moved on. Clara bent, gripped the beam, and lifted. Her muscles burned, her lungs strained, but she welcomed the weight. Every heave, every push was proof she belonged here, proof she was more than the cruel words that followed her. By noon, the work slowed. The neighbors drifted away, some with nods of respect, others with smirks that promised more talk in town. Samuel wiped his brow, then turned to her, His eyes softened when they met hers, the hard lines of his face easing. "You should rest." "So should you," she replied, breathless but firm. A corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she had seen since the night before. He said nothing more, only placed a hand briefly against her arm before moving toward the house. The touch lingered long after he pulled away, warmth spreading through her chest. The days that followed were heavy with rebuilding. Samuel threw himself into the work, and Clara matched him, step for step. They salvaged what they could, hauling charred wood away, setting new posts in the ground. At night, they collapsed into silence by the hearth, too weary for words, but in the quiet, something deeper grew between them. It was in the way his hand brushed hers when he passed her tools. It was in the way she lingered by the window, watching him move beneath the setting sun. It was in the way their laughter came more easily now, small and fleeting, but real. Yet shadows still hung over them. Crawford had not shown his face since the fire, but his absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Clara felt it in the way Samuel's gaze lingered on the horizon, in the rifle always within reach, in the unspoken tension that lived between each breath of peace. One evening, as the last light bled from the sky, Samuel leaned against the porch rail, his eyes on the distant hills. Clara joined him, the cool air brushing against her skin. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Samuel's voice came, low and certain. "He'll come again. Crawford won't let this go." Clara's stomach tightened. She wanted to tell him they could face it together, that her strength was his as much as it was hers, but the words caught in her throat. Fear tangled with hope, leaving her silent. Samuel turned then, his gaze catching hers. His eyes were tired, but steady, like stone that had weathered storm after storm. "I need you to know something," he said. Her heart thudded. "What?" He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "That night in the fire, you didn't just save the horses, you saved me. And I won't forget it. Whatever happens, Clara, you're not alone anymore. Not ever." The words sank deep, breaking something inside her that had been locked away for years. She wanted to look away, to hide the tears pricking her eyes, but she couldn't. She held his gaze, and in it, she saw the truth she had long been denied, that she was not too much, not unworthy, not a burden. She was wanted, needed. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment, fast, urgent, pounding toward the ranch. Samuel stiffened, reaching for his rifle. Clara's heart lurched as 3 riders appeared through the dusk, dust rising around them. Crawford at the front, his face twisted with smugness, his men close behind. They reined in hard at the edge of the yard, horses snorting. Crawford tipped his hat mockingly. "Evening, Hayes. Shame about your barn. Tragic, really. But maybe it's a sign you ought to cut your losses and sell before worse befalls you." Samuel leveled the rifle across his arm, his stance calm, unflinching. "You brought this on yourself, Crawford. Set fire to my land, threaten my stock. You're not welcome here." Crawford's smile widened, but his eyes were cold. "I don't need your welcome. This valley will be mine, one way or another. And when it is, no one will remember the fool who wasted his coin on a woman too big for any man." Clara's fists clenched. The words struck hard, but before the shame could root, Samuel spoke, his voice loud and sure, carrying across the yard. "Enough. You think her too much, Crawford? Then let me tell you what she is. She is stronger than any man you've ever hired. She is braver than you'll ever be. And she is mine, my partner, my heart, my future. And she is just right for me." The air stilled. Crawford's sneer faltered as the words rang out, echoing against the hills. The men beside him shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between him and Samuel. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy, the kind that carried the weight of truth. Clara stood frozen, her chest heaving, her vision blurred with tears. Samuel had spoken the words she had longed to hear all her life, not whispered in secret but declared in the open, before friend and foe alike. Her shame melted away, replaced by a fierce, unshakable pride. Crawford's jaw tightened. He yanked his reins, wheeling his horse around with a snap. "You'll regret this, Hayes." He spat, but his voice held less power than before. He spurred his horse hard, riding into the dark. his men following close behind. The yard fell silent again, save for the distant echo of retreating hooves. Samuel lowered his rifle, his gaze still on the horizon. Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. He looked at her then, and the fierceness in his eyes softened into something that stole her breath. "Did you mean it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He reached for her hand, pulling it gently into his. Every word. The tears spilled freely now, but she did not care. She let herself be drawn into his arms, into the steady beat of his heart, into the warmth that had become her home. The valley was still, the stars beginning to pierce the night, and for the first time in her life, Clara no longer wondered if she was enough. She knew she was. And as Samuel's voice rumbled low against her ear, repeating the words that had first changed her world, "You're just right for my arms," she believed it with all she had. And so Clara found her place not in the jeering voices of the crowd, nor in the shadows of her past, but in the steady arms of the man who saw her worth from the very beginning. What was once her greatest shame became her greatest strength, and in Samuel's love she discovered that she had always been just right. If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale, don't forget to subscribe to the Wild West Love Chronicles channel so you won't miss more powerful and romantic stories of courage, redemption, and love on the frontier.